Hello and welcome to another episode of Needle Stack. I'm one of your hosts. I'm AJ Nash, and I'm joined by
Robert Vamosi. And AJ's got a special guest this week. Why don't you take it away?
Yeah, we definitely do. I'm very excited to talk about our guest this week. So Mike DeBolt is a Chief Intelligence Officer at Intel 471. There's a funny story behind that title. Mike, when he got that title, actually texted me to let me know that he had been moved into Chief Intelligence Officer because I had written a paper on the subject. So Mike got to rub it in my face that he got the title and I never did. But anyway, Mike DeBolt is the Chief Intelligence Officer at Intel 471. He has over 20 years of experience in the military, commercial security, academia, and international domestic law enforcement fields, including serving in the Marine Corps, NCIS, Interpol, all those places before he got to Intel 471. Now, most recently, Mike is also the originator of the CTI CMM initiative, which is a standardized system for measuring the maturity of private sector intelligence programs. Also a really cool opportunity and something that we really need in the industry. And again, Mike didn't include me in that either. So I'm going to get even with him with a whole show of me just picking on him today. But no, Mike, thanks for joining, man.
That's what this is all about. And you know, I'll never admit that I actually texted you, by the way. I'll never admit that.
I have that. I still have that evidence. No, that's exactly right, Mike. I've been waiting years to get even with you. I'm just going to torture you on this show for the entire time now. But no, I'm just kidding. Thank you for being here, man. I do appreciate it. Like you have an awesome background, an amazing resume. You're doing some wonderful things, both with Intel 471 and the CTI CMM initiative. Anything you want to add to that resume before we jump into the conversation?
No, love it. I mean, thanks for having me, AJ. Always wanting to do cool and special things with you. So thanks for having me, man.
Well, thankfully Rob's here, so it'll be cool and special. Otherwise, it's just
and nice meeting you too, Rob.
Definitely.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a good conversation. It's gonna be a lot of fun. So today, I think we're gonna focus today on Cyber HUMINT is sort of the crux of the discussion today, right? So, I mean, again, we talked about your background, Marine Corps, NCIS, Interpol, obviously the private sector, you've been with Intel 471 for a long time now. My background, obviously also, U.S. military and agencies, and then private sector. And we always talk about the different ints, right? You got your SIGINT, and you got your OSINT, and you got your HUMINT, and you got your MASINT that nobody cares about, and IMINT. No offense to MASINTers out there, and all these different ints, right? But we talk about it in terms of cyber. It's a little different, right? Cyber HUMINT is sort of I don't know if it's all that well understood as a term. So do you want to talk a little bit about what we mean by Cyber HUMINT, and then we can dig into how it fits?
I agree. I mean, it sounds like kind of space age. Like it kind of sounds very I don't know, sexy and kind of interesting, but people I don't think really know exactly what it is, or I guess more importantly, the application of it and how you can use it to help protect yourself and stuff. So glad to first define it. I think that's probably a good place to start. So how I think about Cyber HUMINT is it's really the application of traditional human intelligence methods to the digital space. So HUMINT has been around for, I think you mentioned AJ at the top, human intelligence. It's the oldest of the intelligence gathering methodologies. And so what it does is it exploits, the interpersonal relationships of, the collector who's collecting that intelligence with the target. And so, Cyber HUMINT really adapts that more traditional face-to-face approach to the online world. And so we're talking about like trained collectors using what we call digital personas, or other people might call it, which is not my favorite term, sock puppets.
Don't say it. Oh, there it is.
Yes, I'm going to say it because I'm sure you have listeners elsewhere in the world that are going to be like, oh, personas?
I'm sure.
No, they're sock puppets. Okay, well so personas, sock puppets, handles. So it's all about creating these believable identities that allow you to go and infiltrate areas where threat actors are operating, where they're discussing, where they're buying and selling things, really to, passively just collect and understand what they're doing. But then also, if you have personas that are believable enough to be able to sometimes engage directly with those threat actors to elicit, what they're doing and how they're doing. And then ultimately the benefit of that is to, some of it is attribution. So, for law enforcement use cases, it's, Cyber HUMINT can be used to gain a better understanding of who the true identities are behind these threat actors. I did some of that personally myself at NCIS. But then I always like to say attribution for attribution's sake is not really always important, right? You always attribution can lead to other outcomes. So it's not just about knowing who it is behind the keyboard. It's also about knowing who it is behind the keyboard so that you can establish tracking and coverage of that actor to understand their tactics and their techniques and their procedures and really their capabilities and intentions and motivations behind what they do. So that's kind of it. And then so that's how I see cyber human.
So just take a step back and take out the cyber part of it. HUMINT is literally, I'm adopting a persona in another country. I go to a park and there's a drop and there's an intelligence exchange going on, or I'm meeting with somebody who is, a target. And again, it's like I'm adopting a persona in that human meeting back and forth. That's kind of where we're starting with. And you're layering on the cyber part of it.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good way of thinking of it. And again, that's really the oldest, traditional human intelligence methodology is, getting face to face with your target to understand who they are. And part of that, as you said, is being believable and being trustworthy and establishing rapport and having a well-defined, curated backstory associated with that, so that obviously you want to be believed. And so some of that, especially in the cyber world, you have to speak the same language, and not just you have to know the nomenclature as well within the domain that you're operating in. So it's one thing to know the language itself, like traditional linguistic analysis, to be able to speak it, but you also have to know the slang and the nomenclature of which you're operating in. It's kind of like when I've got teenage kids and I look at their texts sometimes and I'm like, I have no idea what you're saying, because it's just like these words that are scrambled together, but they understand it completely. So I know English, they know English, but the way that they're talking, I will never be able to fit in. So it's kind of a similar concept in the cyber human world. You have to know the language, but you also have to know the slang and the nomenclature associated with that. And then everything is kind of, there's some governance that you have to wrap around it. So you have to be careful about like how you're doing it. We can talk about that in a little bit more detail too. And then also OPSEC is very important, right? So you don't want to skyline we call it skyline. So I don't want to skyline myself. I have to manage my attribution in a way that I don't get burned and all that stuff. So, but very similar concept, Rob, as you said, to the all of these things and considerations need to be considered for more traditional cyber counterintelligence, or more traditional human intelligence, cyber counterintelligence in the traditional world. I keep saying cyber. I don't know why. Maybe because I work in that.
So carrying that forward into the cyber world, then we're talking about setting up messaging through like Telegram or Signal, creating social media presences so that, you get that validity and so forth. But again, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So it's like it's easier to do that in some ways than being that person that walks into a park late at night and has a drop. So there are some advantages to being in the cyber human world.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of have to blend in a little bit. If your intention is to try to interact with or collect on threat actors in their own space, you have to meet them where they're at, right? And so we've known for a long time that threat actors in the cyber world, they use anonymity to their benefit. They'll use encrypted apps. They'll use cryptocurrency to try to hide their funds, right? So part of your cyber human operations need to take those things into effect. And so you use those same technologies, because the last thing you want to do is stand out like a sore thumb. By the way, you said dog, and I'm pretty sure I heard a dog in the background at the same time. Was that just me, or was that?
If you did, it was probably mine. I've got a couple around here. They tend to make themselves known.
Yeah, you guys planned that out really well. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I got a couple around here. They tend to make themselves
okay.
The hound, so she's certainly well known around here at these points. But it's interesting. You talked about linguists. I'm going to go back for a second because I was a linguist in the Air Force, right? And so, the difference there, right? If you're doing HUMINT in the physical world, right, you're going to meet in person. You're not going to really be able to pull off faking it, right? People in cyber will try, right? Oh, I've got ChatGPT, or I've got Google Translate, or whatever, right? But I think you make a really valid, important point that still won't be good enough, even if you've got translation software and it's good and it's fast. And some of that now is real-time translation. The nuance is lost, right? That's the cultural pieces, the slang, right? If you sound like you're speaking the Oxford equivalent of Russian as you're speaking to somebody who's in the cyber criminal underground, there's a very good chance you're going to stand out. It reminds me of the old Steve Buscemi, meme of him pretending to be a kid in high school. It's like, hello, fellow young people, or whatever how he says, and you go, yeah, that's just, clearly he doesn't fit, right? So, there's it's an interesting nuance there, in that in one sense there's an advantage of being on the internet versus trying to do it in person, in that I don't have to look the part necessarily. I can certainly fake a lot of things, and there's some technologies, but at the same time, it's still really difficult. And I wonder, I'm curious what your thoughts are, if there isn't more of a challenge in the sense that, at least in the physical world, people don't generally, I think, go ahead and try to fake it. Like, you don't just show up and try to be an undercover, asset or an agent or something like that, right? Because you're going to end up dead, and you don't know where to go anyway. But in the private sector, or in the cyber world, do we have more of a risk of people going, I got enough tools, I'm good enough, and they're going to go chase things on their own? They're not professionals. They don't have the experience. They don't have the background. There's a lot of, frankly, in society in general, there's a lot of people that think they are capable of doing a career field that they've had no training in now, because apparently they've spent 3 minutes on the internet and studied it, and now they're an expert. So do you see that as more of a challenge now, of people jumping into these places and possibly putting themselves at risk because they don't respect the work that goes into this, that this is a career field, and that there's real danger here if you're not careful?
I do think that if an organization is going to try to make cyber HUMINT as part of their suite of capabilities, there are definitely some pitfalls that they need to be aware of. And let me back up. So, and if I don't answer the question, hit me on the head. But I want to try to set the stage a little bit, because when we talk about HUMINT, there's really a couple of tiers to think about. So I can set up a persona, sock puppet, a fake account, and I can just go troll whatever, a cyber underground forum. I can, set up an account on Facebook and get into a group and just kind of sit and saturate. And so I would consider that passive collection, passive HUMINT collection. And so if you think about that, the risk to doing that, it's not a zero risk game, but it's much lower than active collection. Yeah, right. So, and then you have on the all the way at the other end of the spectrum is what we consider active, kind of even a little bit offensive collection, where you're engaging with threat actors, and that's kind of what we're talking about right here, right now, right? Is establishing those personas with the native language proficiency, understanding the slang, having the backstop, all of that stuff. There is a lot of risk considerations that need to be made in order to do that as an organization, even as an individual. You mentioned expertise. So expertise, there's really no blueprint for how to do this. There's certain things that that we can rely on as governance. The DOJ, as an example, I think I mentioned this in a blog that I wrote a couple of years ago. The US DOJ wrote out some guidance for the private sector on how to go about doing collection in across open source and within closed sources as well. It doesn't really specifically touch on HUMINT, but it gives you kind of some parameters. Other than that, there's really, there's nothing out there that really kind of gives you a blueprint. So what I would say about cyber HUMINT, it's more of an art. It's more of an art form. And if you haven't done it, the only way to get started is to start doing it. But if you haven't done it, it's not one of those things that you want to just dive off the diving board and go, head first, right? You want to kind of dip your toes in first, and ideally have somebody locked arms with you who has done this before, who can give you, some insight into, here are some maybe red flags of things that you shouldn't do. Certainly, there are lines in the sand that you absolutely shouldn't cross, like hacking into boxes and getting into people's email. Those things should be a no-brainer. But there are some things that kind of, they fall into that gray area of when you're eliciting information, you got to be careful not to, we use the term skyline, like I said before, skyline yourself. For us as a vendor of cyber threat intelligence at Intel 471, we got to make sure we're not like skylining our customers or skylining third parties and making the cyber threat actors aware of something that they previously weren't aware of. Like you can really easily fall into that trap without even really knowing it. And then a lot of organizations, in my experience, have a wide range of risk tolerance when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm sure you probably have experienced that as well. Yeah. Yeah. And so you have to keep that in mind as well. But yeah, there's all sorts of pitfalls and things to consider that, I would say as best as you can, leave it up to the experts to do it. But that doesn't mean that if you don't want to, as an organization, you're looking to try to get into this space and put it into your tool belt as another capability you have to protect yourself. I'd say start with the passive collection first, right? Just touch your toe in the water. Don't dive into the deep end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, and you make a good point in that, perhaps there isn't a single way to do this, but at the same time, if you're going to run off and do this, going with somebody who knows what they're doing is a good idea, right? I mean, this is a career field. Like the government has human assets, human assets for a reason. They have, human collectors, whether you're coming out of one of the agencies or the military or a little bit of both. There's certainly some training and some tradecraft that goes into it. I think some of those folks end up being some of the best people to come into the private sector because they understand and appreciate the risk, frankly. I think sometimes it's hard for people to really appreciate, especially on the internet. You feel like, well, I'm a long way away and I'm anonymous. And even if I misstep, what's going to happen? And I don't think people realize how small the world is and how rapidly adversaries can reach right out and touch you in ways you would prefer they don't if you're not careful. And the criminal underground, they're not welcoming. They're not looking for spotlight. They don't really necessarily want people to show up there unless they're either victims or customers. It's pretty much, it's a marketplace, right? If you're not there to help them make money one way or the other, they're not going to be super welcoming. So I think your point of, hey, if you're going to do this, be arm in arm with somebody. I've built several intel programs. I've advised on building it, and I've always stopped at the dark web piece and said, hey, don't do this yourself. Hire somebody to do it. Unless you're going to hire people internally who know how, please don't do this yourself. It's dangerous. Even if you can get there, even in passive, sometimes, I've told people it's sort of like if you go to a biker bar wearing a suit and tie. I mean, you might get in the door, but you're going to stand out. You're not going to be welcome, and you could be in.
That's crazy. I use that same analogy. The Hell's Angels. I probably did. I didn't text you that one though. So you. Okay, we need to edit that out. We need to edit.
Industry, we all work together. We're all after the same people, generally speaking. But yeah, the point's there that you can't just wander into these places and think you're going to be safe, especially if you're doing it on your own architecture, your own infrastructure. I've watched people build these dirty networks that are so difficult.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. Actually, so we talked about the risk part of it, but what about the cost to doing something like this, right? Like to stand it up in a way that's actually going to be useful and has longevity, and all the backstopping network infrastructure that you need to build something like this that's sort of separate from your organization's infrastructure. Language proficiency we already talked about, so hiring people who have that native language proficiency, who have the capability and the aptitude to do this kind of stuff. And then just from a time perspective, think about this for a second. Like some of the more sophisticated threat actors who are going to produce the results that you want from a cyber human engagement, right? Like I need to know what are the latest attack methods being used? What are the latest vulnerabilities being exploited? Who are the more prominent ransomware groups and affiliates out there that are actually causing the most damage? How can I sort of infiltrate or get close to that group? It takes time to build rapport enough to be trusted. It's kind of like the same as the Hell's Angels analogy that you gave. You can walk up into you can walk up into a Hell's Angels bar, but good luck. You have to establish. You got to get invited in. You got to be able to speak the same language. You got to wear the same jacket and all this stuff. So just the time to take the time that it takes alone is an opportunity cost issue for a lot of organizations, right?
Yeah, it's a good point. Well, and then you have to consider, what about the finances of this, right? So if you're going to get into some of these environments, sometimes to get into the deeper places, you have to commit a crime. Are you going to do that? Are you going to get yourself
Right.
vetted to that level? Are you going to get into the crypto space? Are you going to tumble cryptocurrency? Are you going to pay for access or content? Or, where's the ethical line there? Where's the legal line there? The government's got some gray areas on that as well. I've been on past teams where we had our own lawyer, which I highly recommend people have their own lawyer for this thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, or if you have any you're allowed to share. By the way, I don't want to cross a line where you're not allowed to talk about policy, but how do you handle some of those things if you're trying to get deeper in, or if you're buying content? My understanding is if it's on behalf of a client, generally that's considered a green space.
Yeah. Yeah, we can talk about this. I think it's important. I mean, I think the community needs to be talked about more in the community, especially for those who are thinking about building a capability like this, or just using cyber HUMINT with a vendor like us. Um, is there like a typing that's happening? Oh, okay. Um, so the starting point is really to, in my opinion, is to establish the scope of what with any other programming that you do, establish the scope of what you're trying to get out of a cyber HUMINT capability. Like, is it going back to the passive versus active? Are we just trying to establish a passive cyber HUMINT capability that's just going to do some trolling, right? Or are we going to try to go all in and do an advanced? So that's the first step, is get the scope defined and agreed upon with management, and of course signed off by legal. And then the very next thing that needs to be done, and this is what we've done at Intel 471 and actually guided some of our customers through, is establishing a rules of engagement document, like a policy document that actually outlines and governs the left and right parameters of what you're allowed to do. And so that becomes an onboarding document for every single new employee that comes on board. It becomes an iterative thing that you have to review every year in order to sign off and continue doing this work. For transparency purposes, like, we share this with we have an external copy that we share with our customers, so they know exactly, what it is that we're willing and not willing to do. And that covers everything from what is permissible when we talk about engaging directly with threat actors, what's not permissible, what are those lines in the sand that we're not going to cross. How do we, when we come across a victim being mentioned in one of these closed source engagements, what do we do with that? How do we manage that in a way that doesn't burn one of our sources, right? Or one of those personas that's well placed. That can get very tricky. So we have a rules of engagement and an SOP that sort of guides that process. How do you work with law enforcement? When do you get law enforcement involved? So how do you get them involved? So scope first, rules of engagement would be the next thing. And of course, all along the way, if I'm an organization trying to stand this up, I'm going to be looking to get my senior management buy-in from the very beginning, and making sure that legal is apprised and has, checked it off all along the way. And then it's just about executing, which we've already talked a little bit about that, some of the pitfalls and considerations with that, both from a risk standpoint and from just a cost and resourcing standpoint. There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, it's definitely not simple. I mean, this is why you don't just jump out and do this. It's not simple. It's complicated.
A lot of this starts out, in my mind, with defense and governments and so forth doing this. But you've alluded to this already. There's a lot of commercial interest as well. And I just wondered if you could touch upon some areas where this cyber HUMINT is used today in commercial space.
Yeah, I mean, the benefits of, as you said, the benefits of cyber HUMINT go beyond the traditional doctrinal government, law enforcement, counter intel world where they were born. There's definite applicability in the commercial space. I mean, I mentioned it earlier, is, one use case that would be kind of solely law enforcement focused would be attribution, right? I need to find out who this person is so I can go, as I like to say, hit them with a stick and do something about it, right? Put them in jail or take them down or whatever. It's not that the commercial space isn't interested in that. They certainly are, because that's the ultimate deterrent. But over and over and over again, what's more common is, okay, I know who this person is or who this group is. I need to know how to protect myself against them. And so one of the benefits of cyber human activities is, again, you're getting into those spaces where you're getting, in a very proactive way, what are those tactics, techniques, and procedures that they're being used. And specifically, like, I'll give you an example. We were observing at one point a particular ransomware group in an internal conversation that they were having, and they were talking about specific vulnerabilities that they were going to be using, or their affiliates rather, to gain initial access into networks, and they were going to be setting off a global campaign to find new accesses so that they could breach. Well, this vulnerability was like, I don't know, 2 years old or something like that, a year old, 2 years old. So traditionally, vulnerability analysts, they're kind of looking at the CVSS scores and new vulnerabilities that are coming out. And so an older one wouldn't necessarily rise to the top of their priority stack in terms of what they, I need to be focusing on this right now. But with those insights, this is a very timely observation. We learned about this because this was a very sophisticated and an aggressive, capable group, and so we understood the reliability of this, right? So you can kind of see how those kind of observations and insights directly coming from cyber human activities would help for prioritization, right? When you have those observations, I need to prioritize this over some other things that are competing priorities. So proactive, early warnings, context, all that stuff is what you're going to get from cyber human operations.
So talk a little bit about what the positives are, and we talked a little bit about what the risks are, obviously, of doing this. Let's talk a little bit about the people themselves, right? The people and maybe the tools, right, that go into this. So when you think about, cyber human, if you were going to design the perfect cyber human operation, right? What would the characteristics be of the person or people involved, and what kind of tools would you need maybe at a minimum? Like, what do you see as like, hey, this is the kind of people that would do well with this, that would be well suited for it. This is the kind of people that maybe wouldn't be. Somebody who's got a big mouth and has a lot of pride and ego and wants to brag is probably not very good for Intel, for instance. But what do you think about what are the great characteristics you look for in people, and what kind of tools are really needed to be successful?
That's a great question. Actually, that's my favorite question so far, because I would be remiss if I didn't say that my team, I have 100 people around the world. Some of them do this work, and I think they're the best in the business. So I'm just going to say that. In all seriousness, it's the hard skills, right? Like we already talked about. The language proficiency, you have to be able to speak the language. That's a core competency. You have to know the slang. So, you either know it because you just you understand the cyber underground and how everything works, or we can teach that. Like, you can be taught that slang and nomenclature. There's hard requirements. You have to be a little bit technical, because when an actor's talking about malware or what, you just kind of have to know what they're talking about. But then there's the soft skills, which I think are probably even more, at least as important as those hard skills. And that would be curiosity. So again, there's no blueprint or playbook for this. You just kind of have to go in and use some of your instincts to understand where to guide your research. So curiosity, asking questions. I think you have to have a sense of humility as well, to know that maybe this didn't work for this reason, and you have to learn from that and kind of be able to shift pretty quickly. And then patience is a good one too, because you're dealing with human beings at the end of the day. At the end of the keyboard, it's these human beings that are, sometimes they don't respond. Sometimes they're just, I know this might be a surprise, but cyber criminals lie.
What?
Yeah.
No honor among thieves. My goodness.
That's right. Or they exaggerate. And so oftentimes it's a test of your patience. And they're also, a lot of them are very ego driven. So a lot of it's just kind of being able to manage the EQ of these cyber threat actors is also a skill in and of itself.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And then there's the whole, like, being able to articulate the insights that you get from that so that somebody can actually do it, right? So being able to report on those things and conveying it in a way that's useful.
Do you worry about anybody getting sucked into the other side? Is there something in there about, gauging somebody's temptation levels, or I don't want to say ethics or morals, but those are harder things to gauge. But do you ever worry about people getting sucked into the other side? I mean, it's tempting, right? There's a lot of money in cybercrime.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I don't worry about it. It's not something that I lose sleep over or anything. I know that temptation is always there, but I think you can offset that risk by being very diligent in your hiring. I'm not one of those that are of the opinion that in order to get this kind of person in your team, you need to get a gray hat hacker or get like somebody who's been on the dark side who's now on I'm not saying that those people aren't good either, and maybe some of them serve their time and they, it's fine. That's all due respect to them, but you can find people who have the integrity and who are honest, who also are very, very, very excellent at what they do. So, and there's some checks and balances throughout that you implement as a program, to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And
sure, well, it's just like handling human collectors in the real world too. Like it's or undercover cops, for instance. Like there's handlers are there to make sure that people don't get dragged too far, because it can happen. You can lose yourself in these roles, in these personas, right? So it's that's human nature. There's something there. What about forgetting not forgetting, but putting aside the people side of it? What about the tooling? We talked a little bit about what are like the basics you have to have at least to be successful in this. If somebody's going to spin this thing up, you're not going to do it on your home laptop or on your phone or something like that. So what kind of tooling is like the basics that people need to have?
Yeah, I mean, the basic tenets is keep everything off corporate devices. Just by the nature of, so a lot of our work is underground, cyber underground. So through this whole onion network, so there's certain software and tools that you need in order to access those spaces. So make sure that you have access to, you make sure you have those tools as well. Virtual machines are also very helpful. So that you can take snapshots and go back to periods of time in your research when needed. Yeah, and then I'm not quite a tool, but I don't know, maybe it is. It's really important to keep track of your personas, your handles, your accounts. And this actually goes back to your earlier question about like resiliency, and if somebody goes dark or whatever, or if somebody leaves your team, and you've just lost that access. So you've got to have programs in place that have redundancy and resiliency, making sure that you're treating those personas as intellectual property for your organization,
Yeah, that's a good point, because people can take off. They can take the persona with it. They can poison your persona. They can turn on you. And you got to treat people well. I think you make a good point there that a lot of people lose track of that, and you don't realize, listen, these assets, these are people, right? They're your assets. They're also people. They matter. They also can do you a lot of harm if you don't treat them well. They are the front end of everything. They can burn down your entire operation. I treat people well because I think that's the way you should. I think it's important to take care of your people, and they'll take care of your mission. But even if you're somebody who doesn't believe in that for whatever God knows why reason, from a financial standpoint, you better take care of them, because you're building all this and they are the front end, right? So I think it's vital that, as you said, take care of the people. So anyway, I think those are really good points. I think it's nice to let people know what you look for in people and some of the tooling that's required to get started, at least.
Yeah.
So given your experience, I imagine you've got one or two really good war stories that you can share with the public to illustrate some of the things that we have discussed.
Here's one I will give you a little bit of insight into. Everybody remembers SolarWinds. This has since gone a little bit more public, or at least our insights have. The SolarWinds actor, I think it was back in I want to say 2017 timeframe, when that actor was just getting started in the cybercrime underground, came into the forums and was hinting at having access, having breached a couple of organizations, one of them being SolarWinds. And so through some of our intelligence collection and through some of our human engagements, we're actually able to determine that it was looking like it was true, first and foremost. So that's a big part of Cyber HUMINT, is being able to assess the credibility and the reliability of a threat actor and the information that they're providing. We actually use a scoring system to standardize that. It's called the NATO Admiralty system. So we were able to determine that. And then also through that same work stream, SolarWinds actor, I'm not going to tell you the name, So I'll leave it at that. But he said, the actor said, yeah, you can have these other accesses, but you can't have this one. You can't have SolarWinds. And it's because I have another buyer and they're looking to elevate their access, is what he said. And so and of course, back then we're like, okay, well, that was just another blip on the radar kind of thing. Third party compromises, unfortunately, happen all the time. But then fast forward, what was it, 2019 or something like that, 2020. Anyway, that's when it exploded. And so, not quite a smoking gun, but certainly in hindsight, looking at everything we know about SolarWinds, about how, the Russian administration got a hold of that. And this was a Russian speaking actor, like a lot of them are. So yeah, that was, it's a pretty common thing that kind of thing happens. But for this one, it ended up being a major deal.
The beauty, if you can call it that, of that operation was the layering that went on and the time that it took before people realized what was going on and the extent to which it was going on. I mean, it was a corrupt update that was passed out to all of the customers, and only over time one by one were they being exploited for that update that had happened. So you can't really fault yourself back in 2017, not recognizing this guy admitting that there was something special about this. I'm leaving this one alone. You're not going to raise a red flag and go, hey, put all our effort on this SolarWinds thing. We think it's going to be big in about 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is because we see these things all the time, we can only assess things so much. So we just report what we report. Sometimes we'll say, hey, it's a low confidence or it's a high confidence. But we want to get into the hands of the people who can actually make that assessment as soon as we possibly can. So,
Well, like I said, there's a lot of chatter. So, you do the best you can assess, is it real? Is it not? That person could just easily have been lying or bragging, and you just never really know. And it's still possible they were. It's possible that person isn't the same, connected to this. There's no real good way of knowing, right? There's a lot of chatter out there. It's true in government side and SIGINT and HUMINT, and same thing out here, right? So I'm going to ask the flip side of the questions. That's a very cool story about a very big event that everybody knows about. You got to know and protect names, protect everybody. I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, but I'm curious if you have any interesting blooper stories, like somebody who just either burned themselves to the ground. Somebody went in and I'm going to do a great job, and then immediately just blew something up accidentally, or somebody who walked into a trap, or somebody who fragged their own people, something like that. You got to have some interesting stories that might help people understand pitfalls to worry about if you're going to walk out here.
Gosh, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. One thing I tell my, new people that come on my team is we have a very serious job, but let's not take ourselves too seriously, because we're dealing with people on the threat actor side that are just, they say some crazy stuff. They have crazy, wild, a lot of very inappropriate, handles that they use and what they call them. I mean, it's wild. And actually, I host a conference every once in a while, just a small conference that we do. And I play this little game called Detect it's like a truth or fake game. Like the 2 lies and the truth, or whatever.
2 lies and the truth. Is it with handles?
Yeah. But we do it with conversations. And it's hilarious. It's just what people say one of them was just rambling on about how he can't live without alcohol, and it was a response to a thread about how what can you not live without? And everybody's like money. And then this guy, and he happens to be a kind of a prolific actor, you would expect him to say money, and he's like, I live so that I can just get destroyed by alcohol every day. That's what he said. So, okay, well, I mean, to each his own. I don't know.
Stop paying him in crypto. Apparently, stop paying him in crypto and start paying him in vodka.
Maybe that's why you're indicted by the FBI. But I don't know.
Jesus. I mean, it's true though, and you're right. Some of these conversations. I mean, you make an excellent point. Just in passing, of again, if you want to get into this, you need to have a thick skin. you need to be an adult and understand you're going to be exposed to adult things. There's no complaining to HR about some threat actor's profile or conversation or context. Like, they are not going to be polite or PC or work appropriate or all these things. Like, I've seen briefings. I bet you have too. I've seen briefings where the hardest part is you see them trying to like half redact the handle because they don't want to put on the big screen what the handle is, right? Or what the conversation was. You see so many redactions. You're like, what are they trying to say? I'm like, yeah, I can't even tell you the name of this handle because I'm looking in a room. I'm like, I'm going to offend 70% of you if I name this actor. And they do that, because it's funny for them, right? So it's another piece to this is you can't really be ultimately too sensitive, at least not about them. Like, it doesn't mean everybody in the office is going to talk that way or act that way. We all have to be professional and appropriate, but the threat actors aren't. Like, these are cyber criminals. These are criminal enterprises. They're not interested in they want to offend people. I mean, I think it's funny, right? So to me, the funniest thing I've seen is briefings like that where there's handles. You're like, they can't even put the handle on the screen, and you're just like, oh my god, how do we get?
It's challenging when you're the briefer to those because how do you refer? Like, you just say redacted. So then redacted this and redacted.
Right. Threat actor 1, threat actor 2. And and you give people the brief, like, you can read it if you want, but it's at your own risk.
What you said about like thick skin and stuff. The other, we're talking about people, right? Because one of the let's just say interesting things that come as a byproduct of doing this is you get to know some of these threat actors as people. And so one of the, and you start to uncover like their kind of their daily lives. Like, so there was this one threat actor a couple of years ago. He was kind of a prolific mobile malware developer, and he actually was running. He did a no. He started attacking, or at least enabling attacks against CIS countries like Russia and others. And I think that's what happened. Anyway, he ended up in a Russian prison. But he didn't stop there. So he actually continued running his mobile malware as a service inside of a Russian prison, like using phones that he would get from the guards, and the guards would get like a kickback. And he was like talking about this on the forums. But it doesn't end there. He ends up, so this was back during the right when Russia invaded Ukraine. And it turns out that he got pulled from the prison, got recruited into the Wagner group, went to the front lines, and he died. He died on the front lines. And so there's this whole like forum thread of, threat actors going, RIP, RIP. Guy's name is Duke Eugene. RIP Duke Eugene, and everybody's sad and posting pictures and everything. So it's this interesting, you get like little glimpses of, it makes you realize that you're dealing with people, I guess is my point.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's a humanity there. We talk about this big organized crime, which it is, and but there's also humanity. There are people that are doing this because this is how they make money. They have families to feed, and the economy isn't good. And I've certainly talked with people who work more in the space than I do directly with some of the threat actors, and you build some relationships with them. And you realize they're not evil, horrible people. Not all of them. It's a means to an end, right? And then you see that, and you're like, well, there's the far end of it. Now, if that guy could have kept his mouth shut, he'd probably still be alive. But yeah, it's, I'm sure nobody could have anticipated he was going to go from a cyber actor to being thrown to the front lines of a war because the Russians decided to grab people out of prison and throw them out there as cannon fodder. That's an interesting way to go out. It's unfortunate.
And I would never condone any of their activities. I don't think that's not what we're saying, right? But I think it's important to understand that, because I think we get this impression that the cyber underground is like this massive, it's infinite and it's, never ending, and you got the whole like iceberg, thing where there's under, you know what I'm saying? Like, no, it's actually pretty finite when you look at it. There's hundreds and hundreds of forums, but really there's only a handful of forums that matter, and even there's only a handful of really sophisticated threat actors. So it's not like this. You can map this out, I guess, is what I'm saying, right? And part of that is understanding who they are and what they do and their intentions behind it. So it's fascinating.
Well, Thank you, Michael, for joining us today. It's been a great conversation, and you can learn more about him and our other guests on our website, where you can also find our transcripts and other episode information. Go to authenticate.com/needlestack. That's authentic with the number 8.com/needlestack. And there's a comment button on that page. We really want to hear from you. So tell us what you like, tell us what you don't. We do read these, and your comments are very important to us. Also, be sure to follow us on social media. We're be found everywhere using the handle @NeedlestackPod. So just look for us on your favorite social media site. And also, if you're listening or watching us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe wherever it is that you're watching or listening to us today. That's also very important. We appreciate your time, and we'd certainly like you to see future episodes when they become available. You'll be notified as a subscriber. So for NeedleStack, I'm Robert Vamosi. AJ?
And I'm AJ Nash. Thank you very much, and look forward to doing more of this next time.